On my 8th day in Scotland and 2nd day on Islay, after visiting Lagavulin Distillery, we headed over to Ardbeg Distillery. Hello, I'm Erik Wait and I'm at Ardbeg Distillery on Islay. Come join me. The name Ardbeg is an Anglicization of a Scottish Gaelic term meaning the small promontory, which is a raised mass of land that projects into a lowland or a body of water. The Ardbeg Distillery has been producing whiskey since 1798 and began commercial production in 1815. Like most Scottish distilleries for most of its history, its whiskey has been produced for use in blended whiskey rather than as a single malt. By 1886, the distillery produced around 300,000 gallons of whiskey per year and employed 60 workers. Production was halted in 1981, but resumed on a limited basis in 1989 and continued at a low level through 1996, during the period when Ardbeg was owned by Hiram Walker. In 1997, the distillery was bought and reopened by Glenmorangie, subsequently taken over by the French company LVMH in 2004, with production resuming on June 25, 1997, and full production resuming in 1998. Ardbeg malt is peated to a level of 50 parts per million. There have been no floor maltings at Ardbeg since 1981, so all the malt that is used in production hails from the maltings in the village of Port Ellen. At the distillery, the malt is crushed into grist by a Bobby malt mill installed in 1921. There are very few of these in Scotland, and most of them you see will be red. This one has been painted green to fit in with the Ardbeg colors. Ardbeg uses water from Loch Ugadal, 3 miles up the hill behind the distillery. The water flows down the hill and runs into Loch Arnambest. From there, the burn takes it to Charlie's Dam at the distillery, and from there it is piped into the mash house. The ground up malt is then added to the mash tun along with the water from Loch Ugadal, heated to a temperature of 63.5 degrees Celsius. The main purpose of the mash tun is to maximize sugar extraction. Therefore, water is added 3 times at 3 different temperatures. Once the third water has been drained off, the spent grains, or draff, are removed to the farmer's lorry, we call that a truck in the United States, and it's taken to feed the local cattle. Lucky coos. The sugary liquid wort from the mash tun is then cooled to 18 degrees Celsius and pumped into the washbacks. Yeast is added at this stage to begin fermentation. The washbacks at Ardbeg are made from Oregon pine. The wood helps to impart an estuary carbolic flavor to the fermenting wash. Fermentation time at Ardbeg is longer than many other distilleries because of the high phenolic content of the original malt. When the fermentation is complete, the fermented wash has an alcohol content of around 8.5% alcohol. After fermentation, it goes through a double distillation. The first distillation takes place in a wash still. That's the still with the little windows in it. It is filled with fermented wash, boiled until the vapors start rising up the neck of the wash still, which then pass through the line arm and finally reach the condenser, where they are condensed back into liquid form. The liquid then flows through the spirit safe and travels into the low wines and faints receiver. Any spirit still produced through the wash is called low wines. At this stage, the alcohol content of the spirit is about 24% alcohol by volume. The second distillation takes place in the spirit still. The same boiling and condensing process applies, but the major difference is that the strength of the spirit has increased to 76% alcohol and the quality of the spirit has improved dramatically. However, there is still an element of impurity in the spirit. Ardbeg runs the initial 10 minutes of the spirit back to where it came from, the low wines and the faints receiver. This 10 minutes of spirit is called 4 shots. After 10 minutes, the spirit is of the highest quality. The spirit is then diverted into a vessel called an intermediate spirit receiver. This is the start of the spirit cut, that which eventually gets filled into the casks. They then run the spirit for around 4.5 hours until the strength is at about 62.5% alcohol. At this strength, the alcohol is beginning to show off notes such as impurities, so they divert it back to the low wines and feints receiver for further distillation. So the low wines go back into the receiver from the wash still, and at the same time, the feints are entering the receiver from the spirit still. During distillation, the alcohol vapors evaporate quicker than water, so the whole theory of distillation is to leave as much water behind as possible, thereby increasing the strength of the spirit. As low wines and feints are nearing the end of the runs, down to around 1% alcohol, they stop boiling because they are basically boiling water. On the line arm of the spirit, there's a piece of apparatus called a purifier. As the boiling continues in the spirit still, the heavier impure alcohols reach the top of the still. The initial light alcohols are sweet and fruity. Some of the heavier compounds are captured in the purifier and fed back down into the main pot of the still. As the boiling process continues, the heavier phenolics come through. This occurs from about halfway through the spirit run. The purifier gives a little extra reflux so that they have 2 distillations and a little bit more. The lighter alcohols are collected during the first 2 hours of the spirit run. Some heavier alcohols include the phenolics, and those are collected during the second half of the spirit run. This is what gives Ardbeg its great balance and complexity, because the heavier peat notes never at any time dominate, although they are using very heavily peated malt. The purifier is unique on Islay and it is key to producing balanced whiskies. Ardbeg whiskey primarily matures in first and second fill ex-bourbon casks from the USA, although they do experiment with different types of oak casks such as sherry butts, some of which are used for Ardbeg Udall, and some French oak barrels for Ardbeg Corvrecken. All the casks are chosen by Dr. Bill Lumsden. Other casks come from Speyside Cooperage and Craiglakey. Because Ardbeg sits very close to the sea, the whiskey receives a certain salty iodine character while it matures. After touring the distillery, we were offered a tasting from the core lineup of whiskies, including the Ardbeg 10-year-old, Anoa, Udall, Corvrecken, Kelpie, and the recently released Ardbeg Grooves. We then had lunch at the Ardbeg Old Kiln Cafe, where I ate haggis for the 3rd time. This time it was served with a sweet red onion marmalade, and of course, I had another iron brew. Alrighty, well, I hope you were taking notes, because in my next video, after I review a whiskey from Laphroaig, I'll be doing a quiz on Lagavulin, Ardbeg, and Laphroaig. From Ardbeg, I brought home 2 very hard to find whiskeys. One is the Kildalton, right up here, and I'll review that one separately. And I brought home this Perpetuum. Now, the Perpetuum is not impossible to find in the secondary market. I paid £85 for this, and I've seen it online for $86 to $105, so it hasn't jumped up in price. You may not find it at your local whiskey shop, but if you just search around, you can find it within that price range, which tells me there isn't a huge demand for this whiskey. I did an uncorking of this live, and I'm hoping that it will show itself a little bit better now that it's had a little bit time to breathe. I've got it below the neck, and I've had this sitting in this glass for about an hour. All right, visually, it's very light in color in comparison to your typical Ardbegs. I would say it's sort of a light straw color, almost sort of the color of like a white wine, say a Chardonnay on the nose. Medium intense smoky aromas. It is showing better now than it was when I did the live uncorking. This has some nice chocolate notes. A little bit of grilled pear, grilled apple. If you're having a barbecue and you just place the fruit directly on the grill. I get that. Lighter caramel notes. A little bit of, I would say the smoke and the peat is very ashy. A hint of nuttiness. So it's almost like the chocolate with nuts. Say a Hershey's bar with a little bit of nuts in it. Slight salty sea breeze. In fact, I would say more than slight. It's got a lot of saltiness to it. But it's not a big fruity whiskey, which a lot of other Ardbegs usually are. This is an atypical Ardbeg whiskey. All right, on the palate. Gotta give it a thumbs up. It's a lot better now. If you have a bottle and you saw my live review and you're a little concerned, all I'm going to say is this is a whiskey that needs to breathe. It is smoke and peat and ash dominant. Can't get around that. It does have some nice chocolate character to it. I am get some grilled fruit notes. That little bit of it's, when I say nuttiness, it's not a nuts on its own. It's nuts with the chocolate. That saltiness really comes through. It's a salt. In fact, I would say this is probably one of the saltiest whiskey I've ever had. But it's not the most complex Ardbeg. It's not the most complex whiskey I've ever had. Most really good peated whiskeys, yeah, they'll have a big punch of peat and smoke, but the fruit eventually, particularly after it's had some time to open, the fruit character will come through and you'll get a lot more than just a mouthful of peat and ash. So this whiskey doesn't have the development that I would like. It doesn't have the complexity that I would like. And it doesn't even have the finish. Like all you're getting is a lot of ash on the end. So score-wise, I'm going to give this 84 points. Unless you're a big Ardbeg fan and you want to add one to your collection, wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to get one. When you can get an Ardbeg 10, which will absolutely blow us away, for depending on where you live, I think I can get them around $47 to $50 US. In my neighborhood, I would buy one of those before buying one of these. But if you're a collector and you want to not have a gap in your collection, then go ahead and pull the trigger if you can find one for under $100. Now, what do you do with a peated whiskey that isn't meeting your full expectations? One of the things that I learned and really enjoyed doing at Glengoyne, as well as the Scotch Whisky Experience, is play around with blending. So particularly at the Scotch Whisky Experience, we blended a grain whiskey. We were given whiskeys to choose from. If you didn't see the video, we were given grain whiskey, Highland, Speyside, and then Lowland and the Islay whiskey. And then we could sort of play around with them in different percentages and figure out what we like. So if you have, maybe you have a Highland or a Spey whiskey that you want to see what it would be like with adding a little peat to it, a little bit of smoke to it, you could take one, even maybe see a less expensive, one maybe even lacking complexity. You want to add some more complexity to it. Use this as a blender, and it's sort of fun to do that. Just keep track of your percentages, how much you're putting in of this whiskey. Maybe you have a bunch of bottles that are under, half a bottle, and you worry about them maybe becoming too old or too oxidized. Good time to start playing around and become your own master blender. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. If you have subscribed, I want to thank you very much. If you haven't yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe. Hit the bell if you want to be notified when I post a video or go live. And in my next video, you want to be ready. Pay attention, take notes, because you're going to get quizzed on Lagavulin, Ardbeg, and Laphroaig. And until next time, cheers. If you have benefited from my wine or whiskey studies and you wish to support this ongoing work, I ask that you become a Patreon supporter. The link to my Patreon account is in the description box below.